Hey, I figured something out. The Drake and Kendrick Lamar thing didn't start with like that. It wasn't that at all. It was actually months earlier when Drake teamed up with J. Cole. The only reason he did it is because he wanted to remove Kendrick Lamar from the best rapper conversation. Hear me out. Drake and J. Cole have been familiar with each other since all the way back in 2010, and recently they've gotten a lot closer. Now, I'm not trying to say that I think this relationship is fake in any way or that either one is being completely inauthentic. I'm just saying that this is really convenient for Drake, who has had some interesting things said about him in the past.
Drake don't do a diss, like an outright diss song where it's a headshot. He's gonna set it up like war. He's gonna like go and DM every single girl in your family, every single girl around your family, everybody, all your girl. Da, da, da. If he throws out a bar right here, it might be a bar only. Like what Pac said, you and I know what's going on, right? But it's all psychological, right?
And if you didn't know this about Aubrey throughout the years, I don't know how. That is how he gets you back. If he's angry at you, he's gonna someone that you're close to and love, and probably never saw this day coming. Drake flew the guy's wife out to do the song, remember? Y'all remember he did that?
Yeah, I remember.
They divorced. And the song never dropped. I don't know what song that was.
Let's set the stage real quick. Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole are constantly compared to each other, and obviously when you compare artists, you're gonna look at streams because it's the most objective metric of talent, but still has its faults. The point is, neither of these guys really separate from the other in any category outside of recognition. Kendrick Lamar has a Pulitzer Prize, and he's won multiple Grammys over J. Cole. With Drake, however, he's never been falling behind in terms of numbers. In fact, if you're a Kendrick Lamar or a J. Cole fan on any social media, you probably know by now not to mention numbers, because you'll see Drake fans emerge from the shadows, starting to argue about how their king has more streams than anybody else. So if you want to count streams, Drake has to be number one. And this isn't a secret, he even mentions it on multiple songs himself.
For debating who to go, you better not make the shit about the numbers, all I know. You better not make the shit about the summer, all I know.
This is where things actually get pretty interesting. Drake could retire today and he would still be winning the numbers conversation even if J. Cole and Kendrick continued making music for the next decade. Meaning that Drake doesn't really benefit at all from piling onto his own numbers. But again, when you compare J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar, they were very similar in numbers, especially a few months ago where Kendrick Lamar fans' best argument was that J. Cole had no #1 hits. But then you see Drake and J. Cole work together. All of a sudden, Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole are tied with #1 hits. Until like that. After recording this video, it was leaked that Kendrick Lamar was actually supposed to be on First Person Shooter with Drake and J. Cole. I think this actually only builds the case I'm trying to make in this video because Drake and J. Cole would end up working anyway. Drake would change his verse to spite Kendrick Lamar and it would go #1, and they would immediately follow up with Evil Ways. So even though they might have intended to work with Kendrick Lamar and everything was in good spirits immediately, afterwards Drake might have been like, you know what, I can just sit here, work with J. Cole, and bury Kendrick Lamar in terms of numbers. So if you've been paying attention to this beef at all, you'll realize that it's just between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. J. Cole doesn't have a seat at the table, he's not trying to prove anything here. But if you're Drake, you could turn the big three into a big two in terms of numbers by just consistently working with J. Cole and doing what you do. If J. Cole starts to get more and more of a gap, at the very least, you're pushing Kendrick Lamar to second or third place because you're helping J. Cole fans have a better and better argument, and it's going to be hard to not acknowledge all the awards and the Grammys and the streams that J. Cole starts to accumulate. Beyond that, this is where it gets really crazy, and if you want to get super conspiratorial, now J. Cole is easily above Kendrick in terms of streams, so when you're comparing those two, J. Cole would win. But if you're a Drake fan, you can argue that Drake was responsible for a certain percentage of those streams. They do this with Future, they do this with Rick Ross, so why would they not do this with J. Cole? So this means that Drake could not only put J. Cole over Kendrick Lamar, at least in terms of numbers, but he would also have himself undermining all of J. Cole's numbers, making him even further on top than he already is. This works in kind of a weird way, but I think if Drake really wanted to prove something, He doesn't have to change anything in terms of numbers, and he's not going to gain respect with the people who don't already enjoy his music, but what he can do is make it so even if it's not Drake on top, it's still not going to be Kendrick Lamar. So honestly, this wasn't enough to prove anything to me, so I started looking for more information on Drake to see if there's anything else that would point at this possibly being the case, and then I saw multiple reports saying that Drake intentionally works with young artists so he can elevate them and take some of the credit for him, much like I was saying he could potentially do with J. Cole's streams. Also, you could easily interpret this portion of First Person Shooter as Drake saying that he's going to click up with J. Cole to fight against Kendrick.
I'm about to click out on this shit, I'm about to click, whoa. I'm down to click out on you hoes and make a crime scene.
Kendrick Lamar drops his verse, and maybe it's just for competition, maybe it's to go at Drake, maybe it's also just to break up the duo when he's not happy with what's going on between the two, or maybe he just felt like doing it. The reason doesn't necessarily matter because he doesn't need to know what's going on, but what was really interesting to see is things go in a very odd direction. I'm talking about the J. Cole apology, and then these people who are associated with both Drake and J. Cole start saying some very strange things on their podcast.
If Kendrick's okay with him dissing, because they had that phone conversation, the day that Future shit dropped, Cole and Kendrick spoke on the phone. They were fine with going back and forth. Why now is it off your spirit?
Then you have one of them saying that Drake said this directly to them.
Can we ever perform First Person Shooter? He has to change the bar now. He has to on Kendrick now. So we gonna on Kendrick every time we do the record?
Yeah, that is kind of crazy.
And nobody wants to hear us together unless we're dissing Kendrick.
These guys might look familiar to you because they went viral multiple times after people realized that they heard Drake's diss track before it was ever released and were referencing it multiple times on their podcast, saying that it was harder than anybody ever expected and that Drake can more than hold his own in the back and forth. Now, the significance of me pointing out that these two are talking to Drake is just to say that they're probably a fair reflection of what Drake is actually thinking and saying to people behind the scenes. And if you listen to the clip, it's really obvious that he's not happy that J. Cole has dropped out of this whole thing. He expected either them to fight together or them separately to go at Kendrick Lamar together. This would just make it easier and easier for there to be a public belief that Kendrick is getting rolled. Now, something that we also have to address and can't just ignore, which adds more ambiguity to the situation, is why would J. Cole agree to go back and forth with Kendrick Lamar just to then apologize for it? That's really odd behavior, and him apologizing and saying it's not with his aura or whatever seems as though it really is more than just music in the picture, and then you hear things like this.
I want to speculate for a little bit. I do. Because I do feel like J. Cole knows something that we don't know. Whatever little rappy you thought was going on, it's not that, and something is coming. I think that J. Cole knows that from either Kendrick or Drake or both. And it was time to bow out because now we are no longer in the first round.
Right.
To me, it seems really obvious that Cole was more than willing to go back and forth for competition and just keep it about music, but quickly realized that it was going to become more than that.
I have it on good information that both sides went in the booth and came out.
They're ready.
And what I'm hearing about both sides is that it's nuclear.
I think what's really obvious when you look at the situation with Drake, based on everything I just showed, it's that he's 100% serious about it. He mentioned Kendrick's wife, he mentioned contract splits. Separately from that, you see random posts about Kendrick Lamar potentially having a ghostwriter that's associated with Drake. Don't think that any of this is a coincidence that it's coming out now. I think Drake has a lot to do with it. And based on what I played earlier about people describing him against Pusha T, how he will do all these sleight-handed tactics like moving in next door, messaging the people you care about, and then also when there were rumors that he made a whole collab album with 21 Savage just to get at Future, how could we be surprised and just shut the door on him doing the same, working with J. Cole to get at Kendrick Lamar? I think it starts to make a lot of sense, and there's a surprising amount of evidence saying that this could be the case. From Cole's perspective, this whole thing is really interesting, because whether you want to say it was him hearing Drake's music before he released it, or what Drake intended to do, or he got the call from Kendrick Lamar, he was in this whole thing just for competition and realized that it was going to go way deeper than that. And why would he get his friends, family, loved ones involved when he was just kind of trying to have fun with the whole situation? From Kendrick's perspective, what makes it really interesting, and I don't think he would ever do this intentionally, but if he were to give Cole that call and be like, hey, back up, this is getting serious, we're not just playing anymore. If he were to do that call and it ended up turning out that people turned against J. Cole because of this apology, or Drake sent the word out and people turned against Cole because he did this diss and immediately apologized, then whether they meant to or not, they hurt his Big Three conversation, because now everyone's going to say that J. Cole backed off of Kendrick Lamar when he was called out directly by Kendrick Lamar and apologized to the man. Not something that normally happens in rap, but when you look at the context of the situation, I think it's really fair what might have happened. Something that I really didn't expect to happen, and I still don't fully know what to do with this information, is J. Cole being on the Metro and Future album. This wasn't expected. He recorded it a long time ago, but you would think he might remove himself from the album for Drake, but at the same time, if he's getting paid and he doesn't really have beef with anybody, do you need to? It's not like he was taking any shots at Drake, but he is putting more attention on the project, which is going at Drake. It's just an interesting situation to think about, but I think more details are going to be revealed really with everything I've talked about up until this point that will either make it seem more or less likely that Drake was doing some shady stuff beyond the scenes. What I do know is that Drake and J. Cole together, it would be hard for them to lose the perception battle, because you're talking about two massive, some of the biggest fan bases in music against just Kendrick Lamar and a lot of smaller fan bases, if we're being honest, with Metro and Future. But instead, we have it playing out in this way where it's a Drake versus 20, and so far it seems to be the case that he might win. Let me know if you guys think this whole theory is possible or if I'm just making stuff up and I'm crazy. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy it.